the bottom line really is that, for a solid cancer, if you're going to need intravenous chemotherapy for 3 months or more, you should be offered the option of a port. And we should try and, empower patients so that would be something they think would be best for them. I'm not saying we shouldn't be forcing these devices, ports on people. There will be a small group of patients who prefer a thing here. They might not like the idea of a cut and stitches, so it's not for everybody, but for the vast majority, it's by far the better option. Nothing hanging out, better quality of life, and fewer complications. Back in 2011, the NIHR, who are the funding body for the National Health Service, put out a commission call for people to apply to do a trial comparing these devices for the administration of chemotherapy. So in other words, it was seen as a priority topic by the NIHR as opposed to a researcher-led application. So I think that's quite important, to people to understand. The reduction in the complications was about 50% when you compare a port with a PICC line and when you compare a port with a Hickman line. So that was the big strength. Also, when we did the qualitative research, there was a fairly strong preference for these devices amongst both the patients receiving them and also the healthcare staff who look after them. So this would be the nurses delivering the chemotherapy and the oncologists. So all round, these are basically felt to be better devices. The only downside really is the cost and whether the service is there to deliver these devices compared to the other two in a timeliest manner. We did a little small survey amongst the large cancer centres in the UK. I think there are about 10 of them, and we found, this was back in 2010, I think, that the dominant strategy there then was Hickman lines, with the majority, which was something like 50%, followed by PICC lines, which were probably about 45%, and then we found only 9% of patients who were receiving ports, so less than 10%. Then, of course, as the trial has evolved, things have changed. There's been a big acceleration in the use of PICC lines as nurse-led PICC teams have developed, both over the United States and over here in the UK and Western Europe. I'm not sure about how the use of ports has changed much over the 10 years because there hasn't really been much evidence to support a change until now. What they all have in common is the catheter from which the drug dribbles out is in the superior vena cava for all of them. So we're delivering the drug to a large central vein, so we get very little damage to the vein from the toxicity of the drug. The PICC line is the easiest to place. It could even be put in at the bedside. It's put in with ultrasound guidance just into the arm here, in a little vein above the arm. Local anaesthetic. It's probably a 15-minute procedure. The Hickman line is put into a central vein, typically the jugular, again with ultrasound. It's seen as a little bit more invasive because you're in the neck, where there's lots of other structures you could hit, as opposed to the arm. And then the port is the most invasive of three procedures to place. It does involve a small incision, and traditionally they were put in by surgeons, not radiologists and nurses, although things have changed dramatically. So a small cut up here. It's rather like a Hickman line, except instead of the line coming out, you make a little cut and you bury the port itself under the skin, so that nothing exposed. So with the PICC and the Hickman, you've got a piece of plastic tubing hanging out, and with the port, you've got nothing hanging out. As far as adverse events were concerned, the issue we found with the the Hickman line was they had the highest infection rates of all 3 devices. So that was their main downside. PICC lines, their main downside was mechanical failure, falling out, getting misplaced, breaking, and the ports. Their downside, if they have one, was they had a slightly higher infection rate than the PICC lines, but the main difference was all the other complications were much less. So this would include thrombosis. Mechanical failure is really quite rare with a port. So once it's in, once you've got the thing in, it's in until it's no longer required. So the other 2 also require more maintenance from a nursing perspective or patient perspective. With a port, you just flush it once a month. That's it. With the other 2 devices, they do need flushed once a week. So flush 4 times as frequent. So much more maintenance. As you probably know, changing things in institutions like the NHS is never easy. And there'll be all sorts of reasons why people don't want to change. So there'll be the issue of cost. There'll be the issue of who's going to put the ports in, and how quickly can they be put in. So there are lots of nurse teams at the moment who have been trained to place PICC lines, and I think we need to be able to sell the message to them that we're not saying they shouldn't put in PICC lines or they shouldn't provide a service for patients, but what we'll be trying to persuade them to do is to put in a different device. Because I think we need to try and move away from sort of doctors putting in the ports and nurses putting in the PICC lines. I think these are all fairly straightforward procedures to place, and I've got great confidence that we can empower nursing teams to place all 3 devices, but particularly ports. And in fact, there are several centres in the UK, such as Christie's in Manchester, where this already happens. So I hope we can. I'm confident that we will be able to change people, but it will be slow to start with, and then we've got to again persuade the people that pay for these, the managers, that although the port is more expensive over the shop counter, at the end of the day, when you look at the total package of care, they actually are no more expensive or a little bit cheaper. And again, that's sometimes difficult to sell at the NHS because people just look at frontline costs. It's rather like buying a motor car, I suppose, that costs a bit more, but maybe lasts longer and is easier to maintain. The very cheap car, day one, is quite attractive because you just pay less for it to begin with, and you don't think about the further down the road. And it's a similar thing with ports, a bit more expensive to begin with, in fact, quite a bit more. But at the end of the day, it's not.